The story opens with the protagonist narrating in a calm yet ironic tone. 10 years have passed since the rise of the Eastern Allied Kingdoms. To stop the looming collapse, he chose to become their sponsor. A bold move, he admits, one that spiraled far beyond anything he ever imagined. Once upon a time, he was just another corporate workhorse. 78-hour weeks, stale coffee, and fluorescent lights that hummed louder than his will to live. Now, he's been reborn as a noble in a fantasy world. On paper, that sounds like an upgrade, and to be fair, it was. Cut to him sitting elegantly in a vast study, holding a thick book, upside down. His eyes squint, his brow furrows. "Why?" he mutters. "Do these letters look like they lost a fight with a blender?" He wonders aloud why he didn't get a free translation perk with his iSky package deal. From the corner, his maid observes him quietly before informing him, in the gentlest tone possible, that he's reading it upside down. A long pause. He nods with fake wisdom. "Ah, of course. Testing gravity's influence on literature." He continues narrating his situation, his tone dry and self-aware. "And to make matters worse," he says, "my special trait is absolute illiteracy. No magic, no talent, not even the basic skill of reading. A true prodigy of incompetence." As he muses on his miserable luck, a maid steps forward and politely asks if he's finished eating. She offers to help him bathe before bed. The scene shifts, a marble bath glistening under candlelight. Two maids attend him, and for a brief moment, he lets himself enjoy it. So this is luxury, he thinks. Warm water, fine wine, and someone else doing all the work. Corporate benefits could never. A maid reminds him that the other young masters will be returning tomorrow, and that he should retire early. The mention makes him curious. "Other young masters?" he asks. The maid replies, "Young Master Leo and young Master Antonio, of the Padio family." His smile freezes. That name sends a chill down his spine. The words echo in his mind like a curse. Padio, why does that sound so familiar? Then it hits him. His body jolts. He dunks his face into the bathwater in sheer panic. The maids gasp as bubbles rise violently to the surface. When he resurfaces, wide-eyed and pale, he mutters, "No, this can't be. Not here." Psychedelia. A world he once knew too well. Back when he was still a worn-out salaryman. Psychedelia was the RPG that devoured his weekends. In every route, no matter what the player did, the same 5 calamities appeared. Wrath, greed, obsession, sloth, and pride. The world would crumble under them every time, and among all the noble families destined to fall, none were as infamous as the Padio County, a den of sin led by 2 notorious heirs. Leo Padio, the king of debauchery, and Antonio Padio, the king of narcotics. They were minor villains, side-quest bosses at best, infamous, disgusting, but forgettable. Or so he'd thought. The memory fades into the day he first arrived in this world. The instant he saw the mansion, that same dark feeling coiled in his gut. It was all too familiar. The name, the halls, the scent of arrogance in the air. His mind replayed the quest title from the game. Investigate the Palatio County of the Asteria Kingdom. A storyline about a drug and prostitution ring called Avalon. Standing there, in that same grand estate, realization dawned with the weight of doom. He had landed right in Palatio County, the very first noble house to be wiped out in the coming apocalypse. He remembered how the questline used to give huge experience points for cleaning up their mess. Then came the cruel punchline of fate, his new identity. Alan Palatio, 3rd son of the Palatio family. A minor villain, background trash with a death flag the size of a mountain. Later that night, Alan lay on his ornate bed, eyes glistening with regret. "I'd rather be slaving away at a copier for 78 hours a week," he thought miserably. At least then, death wasn't on the schedule. He longed to wake up in his cramped apartment again. The luxury around him felt hollow, all of it a glittering countdown to his end. The despair gnawed at him harder than that time his company withheld his pay for 6 months straight. He clutched his chest. How could he be a transmigrator without even a single cheat? Where were his blessings, his system, his divine buff? Every protagonist gets something, he muttered. Why not me? And then a spark. Wait, he did have something. Knowledge. He knew the story's future. The events, the disasters, the sins, all of it. That was his cheat, his advantage. His way out. He bolted upright, resolve replacing hopelessness. If ruin was coming in 10 years, he'd just prevent it. He'd change the script, reform the 5 great sins before they became monsters. They were still children, it wasn't too late. Even if he was powerless, foresight was power enough. 2 months passed. The scene shifted. Alan's loyal knight, Evan, entered his study. He reported the successful rescue of the orphans from the Eastern Orphanage, which, in truth, had been a secret human experimentation lab. Among them was a girl named Yusha, to whom he had entrusted the orphanage's management. He spoke highly of her competence. Alan gave a calm nod. Evan hesitated, glancing at his lord's stoic face. Was that a compliment? He asked. Alan smiled faintly, the kind of smile that looked like it had been installed incorrectly. I suppose it was, he said. Evan sighed softly. Still can't get used to that expression, he muttered under his breath. Alan turned to the mirror, testing his reflection. His face barely responded to his thoughts, like his soul hadn't yet synchronized with his body. Evan, noticing the strange gesture, thanked him awkwardly for the compliment. Alan's thoughts returned to the bigger picture. In a world like psychedelia, betrayal was as common as air. But Evan was different. A rare supporting character who stayed loyal to the very end. That's why Alan had sought him out immediately. Evan then brought up another issue, the girl, Yusha. I don't understand why you're leaving her at the orphanage, he said. A girl that's strong shouldn't be wasting away in the countryside. Bring her here. She's an asset. Alan agreed outwardly, but his mind spun with deeper plans. It might look like neglect, but every move had meaning. Yusha Bloodia, the name alone carried a storm. A descendant of the Blood Clan, her soul was bound to a being beyond comprehension. In the game, she became Wrath, one of the 5 great sins, the very embodiment of destruction, slaughtering hundreds of thousands. But Alan believed in a different path. If she's raised in peace, he thought, she'll never awaken that wrath. He smiled to himself, quietly triumphant. The first landmine, defused, he explained calmly that he simply wished to observe her longer, that the timing wasn't right to intervene. Evan blinked in surprise. The time isn't right? He repeated, uncertain. Alan gave a nod, masking the truth with practiced composure. Exactly that. He then instructed Evan to keep the operation secret and ensure the orphans received ample support. Evan agreed, and Alan handed him a sealed letter addressed to Yusha. What's in it, my lord? Evan asked. Just a greeting, Alan replied. Something to ease her mind after everything she's endured. Evan looked touched. To think you'd write to her personally, he said. I'll make sure it reaches her. Once Evan left, Alan sighed, his calm mask slipping slightly. The letter's purpose wasn't just comfort. Hidden inside were words of power, a phrase he remembered vividly from his countless playthroughs. The Archbishop had once said that to soothe the wrath of the Blood Clan, one must speak their ancient creed. Alan whispered the words quietly, almost reverently. Companion of darkness, tomb of light, one hope, one belonging. It was a prayer or perhaps a gamble. The same spell that once calmed the monster called Wrath. A single phrase held a mysterious kind of power. For a moment, the vision flickered. Utia rampaged through chaos, her blade drenched in blood as bodies fell one after another. The floor was a red mirror of carnage. Alan knew this moment well. In the game, this was where the spell failed, where peace shattered and war erupted. But now, standing 10 years before that inevitable downfall, he believed there was still time to alter fate. Exhaled deeply. One destruction flag had been dealt with, four remained. The question was who would come next. The idea of befriending a monster with a single phrase sounded utterly absurd. Yet, considering her clan's fanatical devotion to an otherworldly god. Perhaps reason was the last thing he needed. The minds of zealots often defied all logic. The story shifted to Yusha, now seen reading Alan's letter. Evan stood near her, drenched in sweat, his nerves stretched thin. Even without looking, he could feel the demonic pressure radiating from her like a storm. Her face was unreadable. Neither rage nor sorrow, only emptiness. Her eyes gleamed with an unearthly light as she muttered the sender's name, Lord Alan. Her tone was sharp, almost questioning. Why has he not summoned me? Evan froze, his voice trembling as he stammered that his lord said the time was not yet right. He repeated it again and again, hoping his nervous tone wouldn't betray him. Yusha lowered her eyes slightly, accepting the answer with a chilling calm. The camera lingered on the letter, its final words etched in a cryptic code. Keep this in the companion of darkness, tomb of light, one core, and one belonging. Clutching the letter to her chest, Yusha whispered softly, a promise only my master would know. She understood, vaguely but surely, what his will had been. Hand twitched toward his sword, but Yusha only smiled. A slow, eerie curve of her lips, amused by his fear. Meanwhile, back at the mansion, Alan lay stretched out on his bed, gazing lazily at the ceiling. He let out a long, content sigh. Another productive day, he murmured, satisfied with his progress toward a longer, cushier life. As the night sky glittered through the window, the moon seemed to smile back at him. He chuckled softly, whispering, even the heavens are cheering me on. With that thought, he drifted off, vowing to work just as hard tomorrow. The next morning found him in the library, flipping through dusty tomes. A thick book tumbled off a shelf and struck his head. Ow, great! Perfect! He muttered irritably, rubbing the sore spot. Nothing useful as usual. Finding clues about the third boss was proving to be an absolute nightmare. Just then, Evan entered, his face bright. We've rescued the second child, just as you ordered. Alan looked up with mild interest. Oh, you were gentle, I hope. Of course, Evan said proudly. After saving them from that illegal slave auction, we treated them with care. Before Alan could respond, the library door slammed open. Tonio Palacio, the Count's second son, strolled in, smirking. Well, what's this? You? Reading? He scoffed. With a jeering laugh, he elbowed Alan's head. Heard you've been learning your letters lately, huh? Should I be proud? Alan bit back his anger, jaw clenched. What a pest, he thought bitterly. How did the original Alan tolerate this idiot? But forcing a polite bow, he said, it seems my elder brother needs the study. I'll take my leave. Tonio grinned cruelly and pressed his foot on Alan's head. At least you know your place. A blade suddenly whistled through the air. Thunk, embedding in the wall mere inches from Tonio's face. Leo Palacio, the eldest son, stood at the doorway, cold and composed. You insects are too noisy. Tonio whirled on him. What the hell is your problem? Don't test me? Leo interrupted, his voice calm yet deadly. I have no desire to spill blood before breakfast. Leave. Tonio sneered, grabbing Leo's collar. Maybe you should leave the stench of the streets outside, brother. Without blinking, Leo raised another knife to Tonio's throat. Keep polluting this place with your drugs, he said softly, and I'll make sure you never breathe again. Alan quietly slipped away, his mind racing. In the game, the Palacio family was a minor footnote, he recalled. But here, their influence runs deep. Two brothers. One, a drug lord with a vast cartel. The other, a ruthless underworld king. If Alan wanted peace, he would have to stay far, far away from both. Later, Alan collapsed onto a couch, exhausted. Evan stood by, hesitating. Young master, the second child we rescued, she's not ordinary. Alan groaned, half listening. Evan's mind, however, was racing. How does someone like him, lazy, detached, manage to expose secret human experiments and underground slave trades, just to save children? Alan muttered. It's all so tiring. Evan sighed. You truly are a strange man, young master. Even now, you're sending that same child to an orphanage. Alan nodded faintly. He knew more than he let on. The child wasn't just unusual. She was catastrophic. The slave rescued from Kalian's illegal markets was Psychedelia, the future sin of sloth. One of the 5 great calamities. Once a victim of unspeakable torment, she would rise to destroy kingdoms in a fury that would terrify even God. In the game, she had been infamous. A creature of ruin, yet disturbingly diligent in vengeance. Alan sipped his tea and said calmly, "The time isn't right yet, that's all." Evan asked hesitantly, "Was that what the letter to Lady Yusha was about?" "Something like that," Alan replied vaguely. "Just a casual note. Told her I was sending someone troublesome her way." Somewhere far away, Dias, the boy in question, stood alone when Yusha approached. Her gaze traced the scars across his body. "The marks of the black goat," she murmured. "So the great moon chose you. How fascinating." Her tone was calm but chilling. "Feel it, the gift you've been given. If you offer yourself to me, vengeance will be yours." Dark energy pulsed from her outstretched hand. Dias shuddered as the air turned heavy with corruption. Then she pulled out Alan's letter, skimming it briefly. "A simple greeting," she said to herself. "I suppose it's time I reply." Back in the mansion, Alan sat buried in books again, frustration mounting. "Where is that third boss?" he grumbled, flipping pages. Evan burst in, pale and shaking. "Young master, it's terrible. The second son, Tonio, he's dead." Alan froze. "Dead? Already?" His thoughts spun in disbelief. "That scoundrel's gone this soon?" The scene cut to Tonio's funeral, a grim affair. Mourners filled the hall. And then the Count arrived. Drunk? High, with 2 provocatively dressed women clinging to his arms. One yawned. "When's this over? I'm bored." The other smirked. "And hungry." Alan's stomach turned. To come to your own son's funeral like this. How vile. He already knew the Count was corrupt. But this was depravity made flesh. Worse yet, Tonio's death didn't match the game. There, he had lived for years before meeting a gruesome end. Killed by his own brother, Leo. Now, the timeline had shifted. Fate was moving faster. And Alan realized, too late, the game was no longer following its script. He recalled how Tonio had once cried dramatically about all the pain and effort it took to secure that victory. Yet now, as Alan studied the Count's face, he could see an oddly satisfied expression, not one of loss but of gain. That look told Alan everything he needed to know. Without question, the one responsible for Tonio's death had to be Leo or someone working for him. Still, Alan reminded himself to stay focused on his main goal. Dealing with the 5 great sins. Year went by after Tonio's death. With the matter of succession finally settled and Leo managing the family's drug empire, the Palladio estate gradually regained a calm, almost eerie peace. During that year, Alan kept up regular correspondence with Yusha. Their letters grew more personal over time, and they soon became genuine pen pals. Sometime later, Alan sat beside Evan, quietly sharing a meal. As he ate, he reflected that nurturing his connection with Yusha might one day prove valuable. Soon after, he opened a freshly delivered letter and began to read. Yusha wrote that Gina was doing well, loved to play, and was growing up strong and happy. Alan smiled softly at the words, murmuring that they sounded like truly good children. But then, his eyes caught another detail. The list of donors supporting the orphanage had grown yet again. He frowned slightly, wondering why such a small orphanage kept attracting new sponsors. Evan noticed his puzzled look and commented that while it was unusual, it could only be seen as a good sign. Then, recalling something important, Evan mentioned that new information had arrived about the matter Alan had been pursuing so persistently. The Intelligence Guild, he said, had discovered a potential clue. Relief spread through Alan's face. This had to be about the third boss. A deep sense of satisfaction stirred in his chest. Finally, he was getting close to finding that person. It was a peaceful evening, quiet, still, and beautiful, the kind that only comes right before a storm. Meanwhile, elsewhere in the kingdom, at a drug distribution hub known as Merrick, two members of the organization entered the dimly lit compound. As they walked through the corridors, one remarked how generous the eldest Palladio son was, his rewards always extravagant. The other nodded eagerly, boasting that their ranks had grown into the hundreds and that the future had never looked brighter. But when they stepped deeper inside, both men froze. All around them were bodies, the corpses of their comrades, blood pooling across the floor in gruesome patterns. Horror gripped them. Then, suddenly, their hands began moving on their own. Their limbs twisted unnaturally, jerking as if controlled by an unseen puppeteer. Before they could even scream, their own knives slashed across their throats. Their deaths were instantaneous and orchestrated. Watching the massacre unfold from afar were Deos and Yusha, the true puppet masters. Yusha's eyes glittered with dark delight as she observed the carnage. She mused aloud that today's puppet show had been especially entertaining, and that the list of sponsors would have to be updated once more. Deos, however, remained silent for a while before finally asking what purpose this slaughter served. He admitted that he didn't pity the victims. They were scum who ground human lives into powder for profit. But he failed to see how this contributed to his revenge. Yusha's smile widened. She told him it was all part of the plan. Every action they took was just another stone in the foundation being built for his grand return. When that time came, she said, it wouldn't do for his arrival to be anything less than magnificent. Deos listened quietly, understanding dawning in his eyes. With a graceful motion, Yusha rose into the air, her power lifting Deos alongside her. Her voice echoed with reverence as she declared that everything was moving in perfect accordance with his will. That for their blue moon, she was his sword. 2 years had passed since Alan began exchanging letters with Yusha. Time flowed quietly, and in that span, much had changed. Elsewhere, Evan trudged through the manor grounds, his steps sluggish from fatigue. After searching for some time, he finally spotted Alan sitting in the backyard. With a groan, Evan dropped onto the grass, panting heavily and muttering that he'd finally found him. Alan turned at the sound, his calm expression softening slightly as he greeted him. Between breaths, Evan informed him that the fifth one had been safely sent to the orphanage. Alan froze for a heartbeat, memories flashing through his mind. The endless struggle, the rescues, the weight of each decision. He realized then that he had succeeded in saving all 3 of the remaining sins. Trying to lighten the atmosphere, Alan offered Evan some sweet cakes. Exhausted, Evan accepted them eagerly, thanking him with a faint, breathless laugh. When Alan tossed the cakes his way, Evan caught them clumsily, devouring them with childlike enthusiasm. Watching him, Alan smiled faintly. He thought back to how difficult finding the sin of greed had been, but thanks to his knowledge of the game's events, everything had eventually fallen into place. Looking at Evan, he felt a quiet sense of appreciation that he told him that he had done well, running all over to complete their missions, and that now he could finally rest. Evan leaned back into the grass with a sigh of relief and asked if this meant their orphanage missions were finally over. Alan nodded. Yes, it was finished. Evan exhaled deeply, a satisfied smile forming, but then tilted his head and asked why Alan didn't seem happy. Alan responded in his usual flat tone that he was happy. Evan gave him a skeptical look. Really? He muttered. Because your face doesn't show it. Alan's expression barely changed, but the corner of his mouth twitched slightly. See? He said. I'm smiling. Evan groaned, muttering that if that was what Alan called a smile, then he'd never seen one before. To him, Alan looked less like someone celebrating victory and more like someone enduring a dull social event. Later that day, Alan lay in the backyard, staring up at the fading sky. His thoughts wandered. Everything had gone more smoothly than he had dared to hope. The 5 bosses of Psychedelia, once destined to become the great sins, had all been saved before tragedy could consume them. He reflected on how slim those odds were. If even one detail had gone wrong, he might have reached them too late. But fate, it seemed, had favored him this time. Breaking his thoughts, he asked Evan how the orphanage was faring. Evan, glancing at the letter in his hand, replied that things were running as usual. The children were thriving, growing brighter with each passing day. Alan nodded slowly, almost surprised. He admitted that if things were that stable, they might not even need a caretaker anymore. He hadn't expected Yusha to manage everything so perfectly.